you were born with more brain cells than as a kid than you are as an adult. Well, if you're thinking about just what the brain can do, I like using just crazy, gnarly examples. Parts of the brains would literally wither, like the flesh would wither. It's not just the thinking and the electricity.
Right.
And hidden painting abilities would come out. So you see, and I'm not talking like they're gonna be in a museum at some point, but a dramatic change in the way they wrote, in their ability to paint landscapes. And you see the before and after pictures. And those kind of things make me think there's a lot of untapped potential. So those examples, when I take care of brain injured, it's not all sad cases. They can be phenomenal in some ways. And you learn that there's so much going on in the brain that we are not seeing on the daily level. So I think there's a lot of potential we haven't tapped into, and that we could if we structured things better in our daily lives, as also in the ways we approach our kids and the next generations that we're talking before we got started. Anything difficult where you have to think is good for your brain. If you ask Usain Bolt, how do I get stronger legs? Run. It's intuitive. But the flesh in our skulls, it's meant to think and feel. And that is the power of self-growth. And it's a thinking machine, it's a thinking flesh that you actually have to use or to protect itself, because it's an energy hog, right? It's 3 pounds but uses 20%. If you're not using parts of it, it'll program itself to let those parts of the garden wither. So the diversity of thinking and the depth of thinking, just one level past what you're used to, is the way to keep the whole garden flourishing. And it is a garden in there. There's chemicals, there are things moving, there are different types of brain cells. It's not just neurons. So I always try to give that metaphor analogy, if you will, that it's a garden and you have to irrigate it and stimulate and tend to all the corners, particularly the ones you're starting to neglect. Maybe it's your left hand. Getting out of the box and engaging the recesses of your mind is the most important thing. And then you have the creative things happen. You don't just sit down and have them happen. You got to work and dream and go hard, and on top of that, something creative can happen. So now we have the understanding that the brain is meant to think. The brain is also meant to command your body to move. And absolutely, the minute you don't use your left hand, the right parietal lobe with the motor strip says, I'm not getting used much. I'll shave down that density of those brain cells a little bit. So that's where movement's important. So simple things like getting the mouse, using the mouse with your left hand and using your phone with your left hand. It's a powerful technique. And then the other thing is navigation. When you see old people and they lose their way home, well, that has a particular address also. Many things are global in the brain, but navigation is in the temporal lobe, and they have dementia in that area. Navigation also is spatial awareness, is a function of the brain, and sometimes when we're on our phones too much, we don't have that. So my kids, I tell them, don't look down. Not religiously or adamantly, but try to just remember our route and just look up and see how far you can get. I think those habits will help us as we get less young. And those are practical things we can do during the day. And as far as the other element is brain training, it doesn't have to be some weird game that's not intuitive. I think brain training just means learning as a habit, one step past where you're comfortable. If you're reading it, you know it, your brain's it's an idle. If it's too hard, it's not even engaged. I'm not even gonna win this race. I'm not gonna kick it in second gear. So just like video games, just good enough to get to the next level, right? They don't hit you with the 5th level, the tilt level up front. It's level 1 to level 2, level 2 to level 3. And that's what learning is. So despite your knowledge and intellect, it's just that level right beyond you that is brain training. So you don't have to buy an app. You just have to challenge yourself and think.
Right.
The way I think habits function, these are my ideas, is that because it's such an energy hog, it wants to be efficient. So this whole myth about you only use 20% of your brain, no, we use 100% of our brain, and pictures show that. But to get things done, we might only use 15. To get something complicated done, we might only use 35. Otherwise, you wouldn't be an efficient animal or a human in the savannah if you couldn't really control this important, but not having it in 5th gear all the time is an evolutionary strategy, in my opinion. So I explained to my kids, okay, so then it falls into ruts, because efficiency is about ruts, like dominoes falling in a certain path. And the best way I can explain it is, as you grow, the brain the way the electricity flows, the way the connections prioritize is a bit like skiing down a mountain. It starts creating these electrical grooves of sort, where if you see something, you see a cliff, fear, it goes down a certain path. And every time you do that and you've reinforced it, it actually becomes less expensive energy-wise to follow and fall into that habit. So these pathways, these habits in our mind, these rituals, these things that are good for us, we want to hold on to those. But a lot of them have become deeply carved, routes down the mountain. And filling those in, burying them, and finding healthier ones is going to be an energy expending process. Okay, the effort will be harder in the beginning, and then as you create a new route down the mountain, you can condition yourself to having more favorable and constructive responses. That's the best way I can explain is why effort will lead to change, and your most effort will be spent in the beginning, and then you can change your emotional and cognitive responses by conditioning yourself to find a different route down the mountain. You're going to reinforce the ones that you're using, and the ones you don't use, your brain will say, I don't need to hold on to them because they're just using energy. But the plasticity is we start off with more brain cells than we hold on to, yet we get smarter than when we are, for the most part, when we are as kids, and we get more coordinated. As we lose brain cells, that's the example that shows you that it's about the connections and reinforcing those patterns. I hope that empowers people to be like, wait a second, it's not a static thing. And much I would exercise for my body, there are things maybe I should do for my brain and mind, especially while the window is still here, to set those into actions and make them constructive habits and maybe pass them on to the generation. That shows that thinking can change, thought can change how fast your heart beats. Why wouldn't we believe that thought can change those subcortical structures about anxiety and depression? If you get depressed, you're sort of, you can get stuck. But people who aren't having those mental health issues, but just want to be better and live a more rich life in the sense of personal experience, we can think about our lives and our habits and triggers and create effects inside us. The mind-body connection is mind down to body. And many people feel, body back up to mind, and that's where meditation and meditative breathing come in. But those connections are real. You see examples around you. If your frontal lobe can only help you 5% and somebody else is all dialed in and helps them 50%, it doesn't matter. That's your best, and that's an avenue available to you. But it's not a simple one. It's not a quick fix. It's not going to be a bullet. It actually takes work. You mentioned repetition. It takes work. It takes effort. And there is no shortcut to it, but it's a glacial change that can happen over a few months to a few years. And I think once, like people who go to the gym, they can't not go to the gym anymore. I think people who find these rituals and habits that make them feel better, they become addicted to that, and they're constructive and they're not pharmacological.